Jake had always been intrigued by the unknown when he signed up for the research station on the alien world of Zinter. He'd seen the bustling cities of humans and aliens working side by side, exchanging knowledge and blending cultures. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of, the chance to witness alien species up close and study their way of life. But no one had warned him about the Explore. These alien beings, large and intimidating, were known for their fierce strength and strange customs. The most mysterious part of their biology, though, was their mating cycle. They had something called heat, a time when the females were driven by overwhelming instincts that made them nearly impossible to control. It was a period where they became territorial, and it wasn't safe for anyone, human or alien, to be around them. Jake was warned. Zora, his alien friend and fellow researcher, had told him time and time again to be cautious around the Explore. Females, especially during their heat. She was kind and patient with him, but even her patience had limits. She would make it clear each time they spoke, "Jake, do not be around them during this time. It is dangerous for you." But Jake, being young and full of curiosity, didn't take the warning seriously. To him, it felt like just another alien superstition. Something to keep the humans in check. Something to make them follow the rules. He chuckled every time Zora brought it up. "They're just trying to keep us from getting too close to their species. Who wouldn't want to study an alien like that?" He had joked with her. Zora had frowned, but she didn't argue. Instead, she just gave him a stern look and reminded him again, "Jake, they can become violent. You need to respect their space during this time. It's not a matter of choice. It's survival." But Jake, being the stubborn researcher he was, dismissed it as nothing more than exaggerated alien folklore. He didn't believe that any creature, no matter how intimidating, would act on those instincts when confronted with another species. After all, he was human. He'd survived tough situations before. He had the knowledge, the skills. Nothing could hurt him. Not even an alien species like the X-KLOR. One evening, after a long day of gathering data, Jake made his way back to his quarters in the research station. The station was quiet, the faint hum of the alien technology that powered the building, keeping the world around him in a serene stillness. He had just finished cataloging an array of new alien plant species and was looking forward to some peace and quiet. He walked into his small room, threw his bag onto the chair, and kicked his boots off. The cool breeze from the open window felt refreshing after a long day of work. He hadn't noticed the faint shimmer in the air outside his window, or the darkening clouds in the distance. He hadn't realized the Explore female in the area had just entered her heat cycle, or that she was now roaming the streets of the station, driven by instincts far stronger than anything Jake had ever encountered before. As the evening passed, Jake grew more comfortable in his solitude. The low hum of the station became a lullaby, lulling him into a sense of security. He took a shower, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by the window with a cup of tea. His thoughts drifted back to the work he had done that day, and he smiled to himself. He'd make a name for himself here, he was sure of it. The breeze from the window ruffled his hair. He stared out into the horizon, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. It was peaceful, too peaceful. He stretched and yawned, feeling the fatigue of the day finally catching up with him. He decided it was time to go to bed, but as he got up and headed for the bed, something caught his eye. He paused. The hallway outside his room was dark, the only light coming from the distant glow of the station's corridor lights. He had heard something Something strange, but he couldn't put his finger on it. It was almost like a subtle whisper, a faint rustling sound, but there was no one around. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He looked back at the door. He had left it ajar, just enough to let in some of the cool night air. But now, he felt the presence of something. Something unfamiliar. A chill ran down his spine, and the faint sound grew louder. He could feel it now, a vibration in the air that wasn't there before. Jake stepped closer to the door, narrowing his eyes. A figure was moving in the corridor, and it wasn't just any figure. It was large, taller than any human, with a shape that seemed to move unnaturally, as if it was shifting in the shadows. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. Had seen her before. The X-Glor female. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had ignored Zora's warning, laughed it off like it was nothing. Now there she was, standing just outside his door, staring at him with those intense glowing eyes. Jake froze. He could feel the heat in the air intensify, the pheromones she emitted filling the room. His mind raced as he quickly realized the gravity of the situation. She was in heat. This was no myth. This was no exaggeration. He had just made the worst mistake of his life. Her eyes locked onto him, and the world seemed to stop. The air grew thick with tension. Jake felt the primal instinct to run, to hide, but he was paralyzed. He had no idea how to handle this. All his training, all his knowledge, suddenly seemed useless in the face of this overwhelming force. He had no defense. And worst of all, he had left the door wide open. As he stared at the alien female, he realized that the danger was not in her strength alone. It was in the madness of her instincts, the raw power that came with the heat, and now, he was right in the center of it. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the X-Glor female before him. Her eyes glowed with an eerie intensity, her body tense and filled with raw power. She was massive, standing at over 7 feet tall, with scales that shimmered in the dim light of the station. Her long muscular limbs rippled as she shifted her weight, her presence a silent promise of danger. Jake's mind raced, but his body refused to move. All he could do was stare at her. The pheromones in the air were overwhelming, clouding his thoughts and making it hard to think clearly. His senses screamed at him to run, to hide, to do something, anything, but his legs felt like they were stuck to the ground. The X-Glor female took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. Jake's breath caught in his throat as she drew closer. He knew he should react, should close the door, should escape, but he couldn't. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but his curiosity and his disbelief in the warning Zora had given him held him in place. She stopped just outside the doorway, her large form blocking the entrance. There was no way past her. The air around him felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. He could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on him, and for a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. But the reality of the situation hit him hard. This was real. And he had made a grave mistake. Jake forced himself to speak, his voice shaky. I didn't mean any harm. I didn't think. His words trailed off as he realized how pointless it was to explain. He had dismissed the danger, and now he was paying the price. The X-Glor female didn't speak. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. Her eyes flickered with something primal, something dangerous. She took another step forward, and Jake instinctively stepped back, his hands raised in front of him as if trying to ward her off. But there was no fighting her. There was no escaping her. Jake's mind was in a frenzy. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. His training in human survival tactics had prepared him for a lot, but nothing like this. Nothing could have prepared him for the raw, unpredictable force of the explore instincts. Her scent, intoxicating and overwhelming, filled the air around him, making his thoughts cloudy and his pulse race. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears, loud and erratic. His muscles were tense, his hands trembling as he tried to think of what to do. Should he fight? Should he run? Should he scream for help? But he knew it was pointless. The Explore were faster, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. The female Explorer let out a low, rumbling growl, her lips curling into something that resembled a smile but was far more menacing. She advanced again, and Jake instinctively took another step back. He collided with the wall behind him, trapped with nowhere to go. Panic flooded him, his body finally reacting to the danger he had ignored earlier. His voice cracked as he tried. Again, please, just stay back. But his words were useless. The Explore female was too far gone in her instincts to understand him, if she even cared. She didn't need words. She had one purpose in mind, and that was to fulfill her biological drive. Jake was nothing but an obstacle, an opportunity for her to fulfill her heat cycle. Her hand reached out, fingers long and clawed, and she brushed them against Jake's chest. The touch was both terrifying and electrifying. He could feel the raw strength in her fingers, the power that could crush him in an instant if she wished. He stood there, unable to move, unable to escape. He was at her mercy. Jake's heart raced faster than ever. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized there was no running. He had no control over the situation. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to get out, to get away. But he knew it was too late for that. The danger wasn't just physical. It was overwhelming in every sense. He had been warned, and he had ignored the warning. The Explore female stepped even closer, her massive form now looming over him. He could see her sharp teeth as she bared them in a snarl, her breath hot against his skin. His body was frozen in fear, every muscle tight with terror. He couldn't think, couldn't act. All he could do was stare into her glowing eyes, waiting for whatever would happen next. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, there was a sound from the hallway. A familiar voice, low and commanding, called out, "Stop." Jake didn't recognize the voice at first, but the Explore female did. Her eyes flickered toward the doorway, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. The tension in the air was thick, and Jake could feel his body shaking from the adrenaline rushing through him. Another figure appeared in the doorway. This one much smaller, but no less commanding. It was Zora. She was standing tall and confident, holding a small weapon in her hand, a tranquilizer dart gun. Her eyes locked onto the Explore female with a force that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. He had never seen Zora like this before. She was calm, controlled, but there was something in her expression that told Jake she wasn't messing around. The Explore female growled again, low and threatening, but Zora didn't move. She stood her ground. "Back off," Zora said firmly. "Now." For a long moment, the two aliens stared at each other. The tension in the room was unbearable. Jake could feel every second ticking by as if it were an eternity. But Zora didn't back down. Slowly, the Explore female stepped back, her eyes still locked on Jake as if she was reluctant to let him go. Zora's voice broke the silence again. this time softer, but still filled with authority. "You're lucky I was nearby, Jake. If I hadn't been..." She trailed off, and Jake could feel the weight of her words. He didn't need her to finish the sentence. He knew exactly what she meant. He had almost paid with his life for his carelessness. The Exclor female let out a frustrated growl but turned and disappeared into the hallway, leaving Jake standing there, shaking and gasping for air. Zora lowered her weapon, her eyes never leaving Jake. "You've been warned about this, Jake. You can't ignore the customs of these species. Not like this. Not again." Jake swallowed hard, the full weight of his mistake crashing down on him. He had come close to dying because he hadn't taken the warning seriously. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. All he could do was nod. Zora's expression softened slightly as she stepped closer, her voice gentle now. "You're safe. But you need to learn. This isn't some alien myth. It's real, and it can cost you your life if you're not careful." Jake sat on the edge of his bed, his body still shaking from the close call with the Exclor female. His mind was racing, replaying the terrifying moments in his mind over and over. He had never been so close to death, so close to something he couldn't control. He had underestimated the dangers, and now he had seen them for himself. The Exclor is raw power, their primal instincts. He hadn't been prepared for any of it. Zora's voice echoed in his head as he sat there, the warning she had given him earlier now seeming far too real. He had laughed it off, thinking it was just another alien superstition. But now he knew better. The heat cycle wasn't just a myth. It wasn't something to be taken lightly. It was a deadly force that could destroy anyone who didn't understand. He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to clear the fog in his mind. He was alive, but barely. Zora had saved him, but he could feel her disappointment in him, the frustration that he had put himself in this situation when he had been warned. Jake stood up, pacing the room in an attempt to calm his nerves. He couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep making the same mistakes. He needed to learn, needed to change, but it wasn't going to be easy. He had been too confident, too reckless. He thought he could handle anything. But he was wrong. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Jake froze, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't been expecting anyone. He hesitated, his hand resting on the doorframe as he stared at the entrance. Could it be the Exclor female again? Or was it Zora coming to check on him? He took a deep breath and opened the door, only to find Zora standing there, her expression unreadable. She was holding a small datapad in her hand, but her eyes were fixed on Jake with a mixture of concern and anger. "I came to check on you," Zora said, her voice cool but firm, "and to make sure you understand the gravity of what just happened." Jake nodded, his throat tight. He couldn't find the words to explain himself, couldn't find a way to justify his actions. What could he say? That he didn't believe her? That he thought it was all just a story? There was nothing he could say that would make what had happened. "Okay, I know," Jake finally managed to say. "I should have listened to you. I was stupid." Zora studied him for a moment before stepping inside, the door closing softly behind her. "You're lucky you're still alive, Jake," she said, her voice softer now. "You have no idea what could have happened if I hadn't arrived when I did. The Exclor are not like humans. They are driven by instincts we can't fully understand. You can't treat them like you would treat anyone else." Jake nodded again, feeling the weight of her words. He had taken their customs too lightly, assumed that they were no different from anything he had encountered back on Earth. But he had been wrong. The Explorer were unlike anything he had ever faced, and their instincts were far more dangerous. Then he had realized. Zora sat down on the chair by the desk, placing the datapad on the surface. She looked up at Jake, her expression still serious. "I'm not angry with you, Jake, but I need you to understand that your ignorance could have killed you. You don't get to be careless here, not when you're dealing with species like the Explorer. You're not in a lab anymore, you're on their planet. And their rules don't work the way yours do." Jake swallowed hard, the reality of the situation sinking even deeper. He had been so focused on his research, on his own goals, that he had ignored everything else. He had put himself at risk, and in doing so, he had endangered everyone around him. "I get it now," Jake said quietly. "I didn't think it would be this dangerous. I thought it was just another alien custom, something I could ignore. But I was wrong. I'm sorry, Zora." Zora's gaze softened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "You should be. But what's done is done. The only thing you can do now is learn from this and never make the same mistake again. If you can't respect the creatures you're studying, if you can't understand them, then you don't belong here." The silence that followed her words was thick with tension. Jake felt the weight of her expectations pressing down on him, the responsibility he had to take on. He wasn't just a researcher anymore. He wasn't just there to observe. He was part of a larger community, and his actions affected more than just himself. "I'll do better," Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I won't make the same mistake again, I promise." Zora studied him for a moment before standing up. She gave him a nod, her expression softening. "I hope so. You've got a lot to learn, Jake, but you can't do that if you keep underestimating the dangers around you." With that, Zora turned and made her way to the door, but before she left, she paused and glanced back at Jake. "One more thing," she said. "The Explorer won't forget. You might have gotten away this time, but there are others who won't be so forgiving. You'll need to earn their trust. You'll need to show them that you're not just another careless human who thinks he knows better." Jake nodded silently, his mind reeling. He knew she was right. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about his place in a larger world, one that was filled with dangers and cultures he didn't understand. He had taken a dangerous step, and now he had to face the consequences. As Zora left, Jake sat back down, his mind spinning. He had no idea what the future held for him on this alien world, but he knew one thing for sure. He had a lot of work to do. He had to learn, had to adapt, and above all, he had to respect the rules of the alien worlds he was exploring. His life depended on it, but there was something else, something deeper that he hadn't realized before. It wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding, about connecting with these creatures and their cultures. He had been so focused on his research that he had missed the bigger picture. He had thought he could study them like specimens, but he hadn't understood the importance of respect, of mutual trust. Jake wasn't just here to study the Explorer. He was here to learn from them, to understand them. And that meant more than just following the rules. It meant earning their respect, showing them that he wasn't just some outsider who didn't care about their ways. And that journey, he realized, would be a long one. Jake sat in his quarters, staring at the floor as his thoughts swirled around him. He could still feel the fear from that night, the way his heart raced when the Explorer female stood before him. He had come so close to death, and it had shaken him to his core. The warning Zora had given him, the lessons she had tried to teach him, they were real, and he had learned them the hard way. The day after the incident, Jake stayed in his room, too embarrassed to face anyone. He wasn't sure what to say to Zora or anyone else at the station. He had been reckless, and the consequences could have been fatal. How could he explain to Zora that he hadn't believed her, that he had ignored her advice, thinking he was immune to danger? The quiet hum of the station was the only sound in the room, and for a moment, Jake felt completely alone. He could hear Zora's words again, echoing in his mind. "You're lucky you're still alive, Jake." He had almost lost everything because of his own arrogance, but it wasn't just the fear that haunted him. It was the understanding that he had no idea how to fix this. He didn't know how to make things right. How could he earn the respect of the Explore and other alien species when he had disrespected their ways so completely? Just then, there was another knock at the door. Jake hesitated for a moment before standing up. He knew who it was. Zora had been quiet since the incident, but he couldn't avoid her forever. He walked over to the door and opened it, finding Zora standing there, her expression calm but serious. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him for a moment as if she were reading him, studying him. "I brought you something," she said after a pause, holding out a small device. "It's a communicator. You'll need it if you're going to be working with the Explore in the future." Jake took the device from her, feeling a mix of gratitude and shame. He had done nothing to deserve this kindness, yet here she was, offering him the tools to make things right. Zora stepped inside the room, her gaze never leaving him. "You've been through a lot, Jake, and you've learned a hard lesson, but this isn't the end of it. The Explore won't forget what happened, and neither will the other species. You have to prove yourself to them." Jake nodded, still unsure of how to prove anything. What could he do now? What could he say that would make them trust him? Zora's tone softened, but her eyes remained sharp. "It won't be easy. You've made mistakes, but mistakes are how we learn. I've made my share. I've failed before, and I had to start over. But I didn't let that stop me." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before continuing. "You need to be more careful. You need to think before you act. And you need to understand that the Explore aren't like us. They have different instincts, different needs. You have to respect that if you're going to survive here." Jake felt the weight of her words, and he knew she was right. He couldn't keep going on as he had before. He couldn't keep ignoring the dangers of this alien world. He had to change, had to be better. But it wasn't going to be easy. Zora sat down on the chair by the desk, crossing her arms as she looked at Jake. "I know you think you're ready for anything, but you're not. Not yet. The Explore, the other species here, they see us as outsiders, and they don't trust us. If you're going to make it, you need to earn their trust. And that means learning their ways, their customs. Not just studying them, but understanding them." Jake stood there, listening to her, feeling the full weight of the responsibility he had taken on. He had been so focused on his research, on his own goals, that he had failed to see the bigger picture. He hadn't understood that respecting these alien species was just as important as studying them. And now he had to make up for it. "I get it," Jake said quietly, his voice steady. "I've been an idiot. I didn't take them seriously, but I will now. I'll learn. I'll do better." Zora's eyes softened, but there was still a sense of seriousness in her gaze. "I know you will. But it's going to take time. You've got a long way to go before you can walk among the Explore or any other species here without fear. You've got to prove you can handle their ways. and that starts now." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. He felt the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready to face it. He had made a mistake, but it wasn't too late to fix it. He could still learn, still grow. "I won't mess up again," Jake said with determination. Zora stood up and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good. You'll need more than determination. You'll need patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen. The Explore and the other species here are not just subjects for your research. They are living beings with their own lives, their own cultures. You have to respect that if you're going to make it." Jake stared down at the communicator in his hand. It felt like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong and everything that still needed to be fixed. But it also felt like a step forward, a chance to prove himself, a chance to start over. "I'll do my best," Jake said, his voice full of resolve. Zora gave him a small, approving nod. "That's all you can do. Now go make it count." As she turned and left the room, Jake stood there for a moment, staring at the communicator. He had a long road ahead of him, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let his mistake define him. He was going to learn, he was going to grow, and he was going to prove himself, not just to Zora, but to the entire alien world around him. He wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Not ever. Jake stood at the edge of the research station, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The alien world of Zinter stretched out before him, the dark sky lit by distant stars and the glow of the city lights far below. It had been weeks since the incident with the Explore female, and every day since, he had worked hard to make up for his mistakes. He had learned to respect the alien species he was studying, and he had learned to respect himself, but the road hadn't been easy. It had been filled with challenges, with moments of doubt and fear, but also with growth and change. Zora had kept her word. She had taught him the ways of the Explore, the customs and rules that governed their lives. She had shown him how to approach them without fear, how to earn their trust, and how to understand their instincts. It had taken time, patience, and countless lessons, but Jake had come a long way. He had earned the respect of the Explore, but more importantly, he had earned his own respect. He was no longer the arrogant, reckless researcher who thought he could handle anything. He had become a student of the world around him, someone who understood that knowledge wasn't just about facts and data, it was about empathy and understanding. It was about listening and learning. Even when the lessons were difficult, the station's loudspeaker crackled to life, breaking Jake's thoughts. "Jake, we've got a new assignment for you. You'll be meeting with the Explore ambassador tomorrow. Prepare yourself." Jake nodded to himself, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. The ambassador. This was a big step. It was one thing to have earned the trust of the Explore in his day-to-day interactions, but this was different. This was a chance to prove that he truly understood their culture, their ways. It was a chance to prove that he had grown, that he wasn't the same person who had almost been killed by a female in heat. He spent the rest of the evening preparing, reviewing everything he had learned about the Explore. Their language, their customs, their history. It wasn't just about the science anymore. It was about making a real connection. A connection based on respect and mutual understanding. The next day, Jake walked into the meeting room, his heart pounding in his chest. He had met the Explore before, but this was different. This wasn't just a casual encounter. The ambassador was one of the highest-ranking members of their species, and Jake knew this meeting could shape his future on this planet. The door to the room slid open, and the Exclor ambassador stepped inside. He was a towering figure, taller and broader than any Exclor Jake had ever seen. His scales were a deep shade of green, his eyes glowing with intelligence and authority. He regarded Jake with a calm, calculating gaze, sizing him up as if to assess whether he was worthy of the respect he had earned. "Jake," the ambassador said, his voice deep and resonant, "you've come a long way since your first encounter with my kind. Tell me, what do you know about us?" Jake took a deep breath, his voice steady as he began to speak. He recited everything he had learned, from the Exclor's biology to their social structure, their traditions, and their most sacred rituals. He talked about the heat cycle, the importance of respect in their society, and how the Exclor viewed the humans who had arrived on their planet. He spoke with confidence, but also with humility, knowing that the ambassador would see through any attempt to oversell his knowledge. When he finished, the ambassador remained silent for a moment, his glowing eyes never leaving Jake. The silence was heavy, but Jake didn't falter. He held his ground, waiting for the ambassador's judgment. "You have done well, Jake," the ambassador finally said. "But knowledge is not enough. You must understand us, not just as creatures to be studied, but as beings with our own purpose, our own drive. We are not just subjects of observation. We are a people with our own customs, our own desires. You must respect that." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of the ambassador's words. He understood. It wasn't enough to learn facts. It wasn't enough to observe from a distance. He had to connect with them, to see them as equals, not just as objects of his research. "Do understand," Jake said quietly. "I've learned it the hard way. And I promise you, I will always respect your people, your culture. I will always approach you with the same understanding I have for my own." The ambassador seemed to study him for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "Good. You have earned your place here, Jake. But remember, respect is not a one-time thing. It is earned every day with every action. Do not forget that." With that, the ambassador turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jake standing there in silence. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had passed the test. He had earned the respect of the Exclor, but the real challenge, he knew, was just beginning. This was only the start of his journey. He had learned a lot, but there was still so much to understand, so much more to do. The world of Zintar was vast, filled with alien species, cultures, and histories that Jake had only begun to scratch the surface of. Jake left the meeting room, his mind filled with new questions, new ideas. He wasn't the same person who had almost died at the hands of the Exclor female. He was stronger now, wiser, and more prepared to face the challenges ahead. He knew there would be more mistakes, more lessons to learn, but he was ready. Sky above Zintar was still dark, but Jake felt a sense of hope growing inside him. He was no longer just a researcher. He was part of something much bigger, something more complex and beautiful than he had ever imagined. And he was determined to make the most of it. He had earned his place here, and he was ready for whatever came next.